Chapter 2 The Match. A fever racked my body for 3 days after I lost my arm. I heard from my mother later that as the cave collapsed, copious amounts of Dusol leaked through the cracks, dripping down and drenching my right arm with it. So, as to prevent the paste from entering my body through the wound, my mentor made a swift decision to sever my arm, but my father tossed him into the Colosseum for his life-saving act. Before meeting his end in the ring, he shouted his name to the crowd as they all bore witness to his existence. Omid. As soon as I'd recovered enough to regain the proper function of my weakened limbs, I made the best decision of my life. I secretly took my teacher's urn and followed a group of Icurian merchants eastward to the land of prosperity, civilization, and unlimited knowledge, as it was in my late mentor's heart. The journey to Icuria was a decision I will never regret. It brought me not only great enlightenment and knowledge, but also many friendships were forged. These friends included the ruler of the seas, the mistbreak dragoness Valda, as well as her loyal sworn brother and captain Yu Sha, at northwest Icuria, where wealth from mining and metallurgy flowed freely. The young master of the Liu family, a modest and courteous noble, and last but not least, the one that always brings a smile to my face, the granddaughter of the Valteka Shen's family from Thundercoat, Feria Shen. I followed that group of Icurian merchants for nearly 2 months before we finally arrived at their destination, Lunazra's Herring Gull port. The long journey left me fatigued, but there were some advantages. My unkempt appearance and untrimmed beard served as excellent camouflage. The Icurian merchants didn't suspect the traveler who occasionally appeared by their side to be the second son of Red Dove's city's lord, a young noble who had once entertained them and demonstrated the power of Dusol firearms. I stayed in Herring Gull City for 2 days, during which I discovered that the Icurian merchants had chartered the most famous merchant ship in Lunazra, the Golden Porpoise, for their return voyage. Thus, I devised a plan seeking out the vice captain and bribing him to take me aboard as a sailor. In the following days, I gathered the supplies needed for my journey and kept a close eye on the movements of the Icurian merchants. I also had a prosthetic hand, fashioned out of steel to replace my missing one, hiding it under a pair of camel leather gloves. I can no longer recall exactly why I felt the need to do that, but perhaps my pride was worried that I'd be seen as lesser compared to anyone else. The merchants seemed to be all prepared, yet they remained anchored. As I eavesdropped on their conversations, I learned they were waiting on a young lady named Feria Shen. They spoke of her with strange expressions, a mix of fear, disgust, admiration, and dotage at the same time, which piqued my curiosity. Fortunately, the wait wasn't too long. As I stood on the deck, I finally saw the girl they were talking about, though she was not quite as I had envisioned her. The girl was barely a teen and was dressed in extravagant attire typical of Lunazran nobility. She rushed to the pier on her horse and jumped off, but after a few strides, seemingly annoyed by her dress, she yanked off half of her skirt to free her legs before dashing straight for the head of the Icurian merchants, a kindly old man named Ping Shen. I hope to God that Feria never chances upon my writing, but I simply can't hold my pen back. I must record Mr. Liu's evaluation of Feria. Like a mud monkey, he said of her. Though I found this assessment rather inappropriate, I can't help but agree that Mr. Liu's description captured her essence perfectly, as I recall my first encounter with her. It was at sea, where I encountered Feria once more. There was a commotion on the deck, and I had gone up to investigate the noise out of curiosity. I heard the other sailors gossiping about a Lunazran noblewoman who had been rescued on a nearby island. She claimed that her family had been attacked by pirates and that there were still many other nobles who were imprisoned on that island. So noisy. I was about to return to my cabin to continue working on my schematics when I heard a young girl's impatient voice. I turned to see Feria frowning at a wooden box full of parts on the deck. Taking a closer look, I wondered, could it be? Weren't those pistols from Red Dove City? What a pity. I shook my head and made to leave. Stop right there. Why do you say that? I was stopped by the sweet voice of a girl, speaking in fluent Lunazran. I can tell you're trying to change the structure of the grip so that you can reduce the recoil, but to modify it in such a way would hinder the release of Dusol upon ignition. Not only will that compromise its power, you may even risk the chamber exploding in your hands. You seem to know a few things. Feria raised her brow at me with a suspicious look in her eyes. I studied in the academy for a bit, I replied, not wanting to reveal my true identity. Then let's have a match. We'll see if your theories makes you the better expert, or my own tinkering and practice. Without even giving me a chance to speak, she dragged me into one of the cabins. I was surprised that such a place existed on the ship. I looked around and saw walls covered in drawings, tools scattered on the floor, and a table covered with parts, on par with a small workshop. Varia Shen pulled out 2 pistols from a box and skillfully disassembled them. Let's begin. The rules are simple. Whoever assembles it faster wins, and the loser has to recognize the winner as teacher and treat them as such. A provocative grin appeared on her face as she challenged me. Dare to take me on? Yes. Feria was determined to see the match through, but I was also young enough to be itching with competitive spirit at the time, so I accepted her challenge. Inside the cabin, only the sounds or parts clicking and scraping against each other could be heard, as well as sand falling through an hourglass. As the last of the sand was about to fall through, Feria had already raised her pistol and aimed it at me, whereas I had only just finished assembling mine. You're not taking me seriously. The excitement on her face was gone, replaced with anger. You only use your left hand. Are you insulting me? Just as I was about to explain, shouts from around the ship could be heard. Pirates! We're under attack! Prepare for battle! The voices warned. Feria's angry expression turned into panic. I gestured for her to hide in a nearby cupboard while I drew my scimitar and hid next to the cabin door. The commotion on the deck did not last long. When the noise died and the only thing I could hear was my beating heart in the silence, the door was kicked open. Instead of rushing in, the intruder shouted to his subordinates to be cautious in their search. But I knew that my ambush had failed, so I stepped forward to duel him, wishing for a miracle that we could come out of this alive. At the time, I had no idea that my opponent was the second in command of the Mist Brig Dragoness's fleet, Yu Sha, but I still can't help but shudder at how I recall our battle on that day. Yu Sha did not underestimate me, even though I was still in disguise as a Lunazran sailor. His trident moved swiftly and relentlessly, often striking me from unexpected angles, but it was his terrifying strength that was most worrying. In just a few blows, I had torn the web of my hand as I defended myself from his attacks. It did not take more than a few minutes for my clothes to be torn into pieces by the tips of his trident. Is something wrong with your right hand? He stopped his attack and asked with a questioning squint. I was about to give my answer when I noticed Feria silently sneaking out of the cupboard with a pistol in each hand, aiming at Yu Sha while trembling in fear. No! At the critical moment, I lunged in her direction and knocked away the barrel of her pistols with my right arm just as she pulled the trigger. The scorching air waves and muzzle blasts of her firearms burned several large holes in my leather gloves, exposing the blackened steel skeleton inside. Surrender, we surrender! I shouted anxiously in clumsy Icurian. Later, when I sparred with Yu Sha, he asked me once why I helped him then. I just smiled in response. I recalled the thought that flashed in my mind then. Feria's river of destiny had only just begun flowing. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself had I allowed it to be stained with crimson so close to its spring. End of chapter 2.